to develop a network. Ready? Good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening. Thank you all so very much for coming.
What keeps the ocean perpetual? It's taken more than 4 billion years for the ocean to arrive at the state that we enjoy today. It's taken us about 4.5 decades to significantly unravel those systems that make Earth habitable for us and the rest of life on Earth as we know it. The next 10 years will really determine the outcome of the next 10,000 years. Mission Blue was founded in 2009 to develop a network of hope spots, protected areas in critically vulnerable parts of the ocean. There are now over 140 hope spots globally, and more to come. It's really about developing a network of people who are inspired to make a difference through their actions, getting people around the world to come together, to use their knowledge, to use their desire to do something positive, and to inspire others to do the same. What can they do to turn things from this into a time of recovery? That is the goal. That's what will make the living ocean perpetual.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming what I think promises to be an incredibly special evening. I'm Richard Garriott. I'm the president of the Explorers Club, and welcome to the 6th annual World Oceans Week presented by our dear friends at Rolex, who is the Explorers Club longest and dearest partner. Thank you all so very much. It has also been accomplished with the support of a group of other visionary supporters, such as the Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, GLEX, the Global Exploration Summit, the Phil Stevenson Foundation, the Lindblad Expeditions, Fjallraven, and a number of other really incredibly generous individual donors. Thank you very much, by the way, for Ted Janulis. Thank you, Ted. You were trying to avoid being pointed out, but thank you. Ted is the founder of these Ocean Week programs, and I've only gotten to see a little taste of how hard him and the rest of the team is working to pull this off. They've just done an incredible job, starting with Alex and Julie Wallace, his co-chairs for this week. Alex and Julie, where are you all hiding out? There you are. Yeah. You know, I'm very excited today. We have a very special announcement a little later. You got a little tiny hint of it almost right there from our dear friend Sylvia Earl and her friends from the Shinnecock Bay area, who will be up at the second half of our program and doing something I think you will all find extremely exciting. But first, we're here to learn about some really big ideas. You know, our Fellowship of Explorers, I think, is, acutely positioned and uniquely aware of the global challenges that we face here on planet Earth. From climate change to pollution to extinction and food and water security, there's a long list of pretty daunting problems that are mounting against us. And really the only way we're going to address these growing and already critical issues is with some pretty big idea thinking. And now I'd like to welcome our host for tonight through first a little video clip from our man who is full of big ideas, a club fellow, David Shaw. So first the video and then David.
The global ocean economy is estimated by the United Nations to exceed $3 trillion annually. Government subsidies to the global fishing industry are estimated to exceed $30 billion annually. These subsidies contribute to the depletion of world fish stocks, including fishing that is illegal, unreported, and unregulated. At its meeting in June 2022, the World Trade Organization has another opportunity for an agreement to curb subsidies in support of the health of world oceans. Also at stake is the credibility of the organization's effectiveness. The Great Blue Wall Initiative is a plan by 10 nations in the Western Indian Ocean to create an expansive network of marine protected areas across a region at significant risk, including oil and gas extraction. Included in this protected area are mangrove forests and seagrass meadows that contribute significantly to carbon sequestration and biodiversity. Less than 20% of the world's seafloor has been mapped. A project named Seabed 2030 aims to map 100% of the ocean's floor by decade's end. An urgent challenge for us today is to move from ocean economies based on exploitation of marine resources to a model that emphasizes sustainability and wise stewardship. Running Tide is a Maine-based venture that uses new technology to accelerate and scale naturally restorative benefits of shellfish and kelp, rebuilding food systems, removing excess carbon, and restoring coastal ecosystems. Saildrone is the world leader in ocean-going autonomous surface vehicles, providing unrivaled payload range and reliability from a system with no crew on board. Saildrone vehicles collect data that provide unprecedented intelligence for climate, mapping, and maritime security applications. Water Bear Network is a free interactive video and digital platform. We are dedicated to supporting United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through inspirational content and technology that empowers viewers to take action through a global network of partners. Nautilus is a powerful new voice for science via our weekly magazine and digital media. Feature stories address important issues in marine science, neuroscience, and much more.
Akua is creating nutritious, delicious, plant-based products from one of the most sustainable sources of food on Earth, ocean-farmed kelp. Kelp grows abundantly. We source this virtuous sea vegetable from regenerative aquaculturists who tend to their kelp farms like large underwater rainforests along the coast of Maine.
Every year, more than 1 trillion tiny forage fish are harvested from the oceans to feed farmed fish. If the tiny forage fish are depleted, wild fisheries could collapse. The F3, the future of fish feed, is turning this shortage of forage fish into an opportunity by accelerating new cost-effective alternatives to fish meal and fish oil with a contest. One of China's largest aquafeed companies, Guangdong Evergreen Feed Company, won the first contest with its fish-free feed for tilapia and carp, the two top farm-raised fish in the world. In its second contest, the F3 Fish Oil Challenge, the Dutch company Veramaris won for selling its algae oil rich in heart-healthy omega-3s. Now the race is on to create and sell a complete fish-free feed for salmonids, as well as for shrimp and other carnivorous species, some of the largest consumers of fish meal and fish oil.
Thanks, Richard. I hope that that's helpful in setting the tone for the big ideas we're going to talk about tonight. And importantly, those were big ideas that were some were private sector, some were public sector. And I think it's important for us all to realize that it's going to take action, bold action across all those sectors to get where we want to go. So we're very fortunate tonight to have inspirational speakers to talk about their big ideas relevant to UN Ocean Week. Our first speaker is Kate Fleming. Kate is the co-founder and director of the Bridge Initiative, which is a nonprofit that bridges art and science to create public art for environmental advocacy. Tonight she'll discuss the big idea of Project Reefline. And Reefline is a proposed 7-mile artificial reef and sculpture park in Miami to educate the public on the importance of healthy marine habitats. Kate serves as Vice Chair of Reefline. Welcome, Kate. Although, are we going to see some media first? Okay. Welcome, Kate, in a minute after this.
The Reefline is using the power of art to bring people together to solve the climate emergency we're living in right now.
We can't wait for reefs to die to wonder where our fish are going to go. Coral reefs are like the cities of the ocean. They're thriving ecosystems that support biodiversity, and it's critical to make structure that mimics natural reefs to go beyond restoration and actually regenerate our ecosystems.
The Reefline is a series of underwater sculptures that are artificial reefs and perform as marine sanctuaries. I've always seen arts and culture as the allies of any interesting human movement. So the origin of the Reefline is science, but we're using art to tell a more compelling story.
Miami Beach in South Florida is totally man-made, dredged land. We stopped a lot of the watersheds. We smothered a lot of the reefs. So I think it's really important to build back and to allow nature to have a structure that it can thrive on. The great thing about this project is we're collaborating with a lot of different scientists and experts in oceanography, coastal engineering, as well as ecology and biology to really contribute to a more scientifically sound site.
It's really hard to get an artificial reef permitted. And so we've been working with the Reefline to design project-specific criteria, not only to meet these regulations, but to go above and beyond so that we are enhancing the aquatic environment and not impacting it.
I grew up going to South Beach, south of 5th. In my early 20s, they deployed a concrete tiki bar that's called the Jose Cuervo Reef. And over the years, I've seen them become marine habitats and propagate lots of corals naturally. So it's kind of a proof of concept and an inspiration for what the Reefline can be.
We have the tools in our hands to make the changes. It's just that we are not making them at the pace we need, and people are not engaged.
The ocean's out of sight, out of mind for many people, and we need to change that narrative and make it personal. And art has the ability to do that.
Einstein said it, like before being a scientist, you have to be an artist. So using the tech of science with the creativity of art, I think it's a pretty unbeatable formula. I don't believe there is any greater purpose than serving nature. It's a blessing to actually be able to be working in a project like this with so many amazing people.
This is a place so dear to my heart, and really it's the canary in the coal mine of climate change. And I would like to be part of the solution of how Miami Beach can stay here a bit longer, because I love it.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here tonight with all of you and to present this idea. The Reefline really embodies what Bridge Initiative's mission is, which is to connect artists and scientists to create public artworks about the environment. This is a huger realization of that vision, and it's been an honor to get involved with this project. I serve as Vice Chair of the Reefline, and my organization, Bridge, was doing a project called Coral City Camera, which now has been streaming for 2 years. It's a live feed of a coral reef in Biscayne Bay, and it's right at the tip of the Port of Miami, and it's on some riprap that had been, this is actually the live feed right here. So this is it's a stormy day right now in Miami, so it's not as clear and vibrant as I would like it to be, but it's live and happening in real time. But anyway, the Coral City Camera is this live feed right at the tip of the Port of Miami, and it's just around the corner from where the Reefline's first deployment will be, south of 5th on 4th Street. So based on watching this and having this successful live feed for 2 years, it's also a proof of concept beyond just Jose Cuervo Tiki Bar Reef, which has become a successful and thriving reef, even though no one's transplanted corals, it just happened on its own. And really all around Biscayne Bay, there is thriving reefs, staghorn corals, bouldering corals that have just propagated on seawalls, on riprap, on anything that anyone puts in there. And really against all odds, because we native South Floridians have done everything we can do in our power to diminish and destroy our bay. But these corals, and we call them corals of opportunity, have really just taken over. They're urban corals that have just propagated all over the bay. And these staghorns right here, actually, we planted about a year ago, and they're also thriving. So really, that gave me the confidence that the reef line would be a success. It is just around the corner off the coast of Miami Beach at a swimmable distance from shore. So it's going to be an amazing dive from the beach. And we're using artists' sculptures that will be made out of concrete with calcium carbonate so that it propagates more coral growth to create an infrastructure that really is not there. About 50 years ago, we had a sand renourishment project on Miami Beach that smothered all of our offshore reefs. So it's just kind of a wasteland out there, and there's nowhere for fish to come and hide. So this will definitely create a habitat where fish can come, and hopefully corals will also grow. And we realized that, you know, creating this sculpture park isn't going to solve all the ocean's problems or all the problems with coral reefs, but we do believe it's going to become an amazing educational tool, not just for South Florida schools, but really globally, and also educating the locals as well as tourists of what South Florida has to offer. People come to Miami to party, to have dinner, to work on a boat, or you know, see some art, but there's so much more below the surface. You know, Miami Beach is sandwiched between two national parks, the Everglades and Biscayne Bay National Park. And I think a lot of people that come to Miami don't even think about these ecosystems that are, you know, thriving, even though these huge cities are happening and there's continuous urban sprawl. So I hope that the reef line will bring awareness to this and inspire people by how much biodiversity there is, and also the importance of protecting it before it's gone. Right now, with the reef line, we have gotten all 3 permits that we need to deploy phase 1, which was a feat. And yes, thank you. We're in the fundraising phase. So if anyone wants a reef named after them, come see me after this panel. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Kate. When can we actually come down and do some diving there?
Hopefully within 2022.
Later this year. We'll all be down there. Okay, thanks. By the way, there will be opportunities for questions after this and a little bit of a conversation. Our next speaker is Sheena Talma. She's a marine scientist with deep enthusiasm for the deep sea, based in Seychelles. Tonight she'll talk about the big idea of expanding awareness of the importance of deep sea habitats. I think we're going to start again with a video. Is that right, Sheena? No. Okay.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I remember at the beginning I was like, I'm so nervous. And then I remembered that we're all here for one reason, because we love the ocean. And here's a little bit of a story of how I fell in love with the deep sea. So for those who don't know where the Seychelles is, it's over here. Off the east coast of Africa. It's spread between 4 and 10 degrees south of the equator. And this young lady over here is myself. And as you can see, I've always had good sense in fashion. But Growing up in a small island state, or as Ambassador Ronnie Rugimo would say, was a Seychelles, a big ocean state, or a boss, we spend a lot of our time next to the sea, whether it's on the beach, whether it's for family picnics, whether it's swimming. Our whole existence depends on our ocean. But a lot of that time is spent in the shallows. Okay, so this is what we have access to. So we spend a lot of time on the coral reefs at 10, 20 meters max. And this is where we get a lot of our food as well. But if you look at the Seychelles, the whole EEZ, more than 95% of our waters is deep sea, a lot of which we have not explored. Well, our first time exploring, and this is where I fell in love with the deep sea, was in 2019. Now, if you can imagine, a fresh graduate out of university, really excited to change the world, going back to her home nation, the Seychelles, and working for the government in 2018. At the same time, Menhaden, this organization that I currently work with, was planning an expedition. So the way they go about it is they communicate with the government and co-create an expedition together down to 300 meters. So as you can imagine, I was extremely excited because the portfolio was handed over to me. Very lucky. Now, I was exposed to a whole bunch of equipment that I could only dream about. In 2019, there was about 50 of us on a vessel, lots of Seychelles involved. And what stuck with me is the beauty of our ocean. So as we go down from 10 meters, this is what we're used to. We see these bright lit coral reefs full of fish. Then as we go down to 30 to 60 meters, that begins to change. Something I wasn't quite used to at this point. Beautiful fan corals. But then came the unknown. Over 100 meters, 120. This was mysterious to me. I had no idea what I was looking at. Was that a coral? Was that a sponge? What's a basket star? And at 300 meters, I found this place that was so serene, incredibly dark, but so beautiful in its own way. So that's where I fell in love with the deep sea. And after that, I was like, well, I definitely want to see deep sea research happen in the Seychelles and led by Seychelles or scientists from the Indian Ocean. But here's the trouble. One of the biggest issues that we face in the deep sea is the fact that it's so hard to get to. And a lot of the equipment and expertise needed to do that research is concentrated in the northern hemisphere or areas with a bit more resources, as you can see on this map. And this was from 2021, so last year. A new study, which is currently being done by the Ocean Discovery League and a very close partner, also looks at something similar. What is the capacity to actually do deep sea research worldwide? And as we can see from here, so on your right-hand side, that's the number of responses. And on your left-hand side, that's where people have access to deep sea vehicles. And that can be drop cameras, that can be tows, that can be ROVs. And as you can see again, a lot of that is concentrated in the northern hemisphere. So you might be thinking, jeepers, you've got a big job ahead of you to actually try and do research in a small island state. But encouragingly, there are lots of equipment that is being made by engineers, researchers, scientists that will enable people from everywhere around the world to be able to deploy deep sea technology so that they can find out what lives in their own oceans. So what are we doing in the Seychelles? What is my project about? Well, we have partnered with the Ocean Discovery League to deploy the Macanui, which is a newly developed camera system that can go down to 1,500 meters. This will give us the opportunity to have a glimpse of what lives below our surface. And we're so proud to have been able to get a National Geographic grant, which is as of this year. And we also did some other type of fundraising online. So just get crowdfunding from people who are interested in our project. Most importantly is to get other people excited. So over the last 3 years, we've been conducting different types of activities with kids at museums, and I lecture a class on deep sea as well in the Seychelles. But most of all, we have a huge group of collaborators and more organizations that are signing up and encouraging us to continue our search of the deep sea. And these are not just scientists. These are scientists, filmmakers, engineers, communicators. So I want to end with this today. Everyone is an explorer. How could you possibly live your life looking at a door and not open it? And that's 100% true. But I want to add this. Sometimes the door is locked, and we need someone with a key to help us get in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheena. When do we all get to go with you? Nice. We'll talk about that in the Q&A, I'm sure. So our next speaker is Brad Ack. Brad's Executive Director of Ocean Visions, which is a network of research and academic institutions focused on solutions to some of these great ocean challenges. The big idea he'll talk to us about tonight is a new ocean climate agenda and maybe explain the secret of ocean chemistry to all of us.
Thank you, everybody. Somebody take the clicker. I'm sorry. There it is. Okay. So my big idea is actually more of a realization than one single idea. It's something that's basically been growing and growing and growing over the past 35 years of working in conservation and watching everything that we've worked for, whether terrestrially or in the oceans, being eclipsed by the crisis that we face in the climate. And recognizing that our climate response, as it's currently framed, is not doing enough to meet the challenge. So the big idea here is that we need a 3R approach to a climate agenda. We've spent 45 years on reduce. We haven't done it. Keeps going up. We need to add some elements to the agenda, one being remove and one being repair. And these are both enormous opportunities that are going to require hundreds, if not thousands, of different ideas within them, and where there's going to also be a lot of opportunity for engagement. So we know we have a climate crisis. Our own Secretary General of the United Nations just down the road, has called it a code red for humanity. This is not a leftist, activist, climate person. This is the Secretary General of the UN. Code red for humanity. All right, this was in the recent report just earlier this year. So we have an emergency, but we're not really acting like it's an emergency. And what's often less understood is that, in fact, the climate crisis is really an ocean crisis. We like to say that the ocean has absorbed a whole bunch of the heat that we've trapped on the planet, and it's been a sink for carbon dioxide. And we say that like it's done that without pain and without harm. Anything but that is true. So there are two existential threats to the ocean from our climate crisis. The first is that we are trapping an enormous amount of excess heat that would have otherwise been dispersed into the atmosphere and out into space. we're trapping that in our biosphere. And 90-some% of that heat is going into the ocean. This little graphic shows you an anomaly in July 2019 of sea surface temperatures compared to an average of not that far ago from 1993 to 2016. And in 2019, you can see these red zones, which are 2 degrees centigrade above normal. This has an enormous number of impacts. First, we have these things called marine heat waves. That's the Great Pacific Blob that appeared over 3 years off of the Pacific coast, responsible for killing millions of seabirds and countless other species. These marine heat waves also kill coral reefs, and they are coming and increasing. We've got change in sea level, about 40% of which is due to all of that heat that the water is absorbing. And, sea level rise isn't only about coastal communities facing higher seas. It inundates coastal ecosystems that are critical for the biodiversity that we care about. And it has a lot of impacts on our ocean and our ocean's ecosystems. We also have enormous changes in the cryosphere due to all this heat. We're losing Arctic ice at a very dangerous pace. We're losing the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, and a lot of this is documented in the report that you can see the cover of. And then finally, but not finally from ocean heat, we're also seeing deoxygenation of the ocean. Right? So these are the biggest impacts to the ocean, bar none. Not plastics, not overfishing. Those are all super important, but recoverable. These changes cannot be recovered unless we reverse them. And the second big threat from this buildup of carbon in the atmosphere is ocean acidification. About 30% of all that carbon is going into the upper layer of the ocean. That's not a carbon sink. It is a carbon sink, but it's actually causing the oceans to become more corrosive and acidic, which threatens sea life. About 30% more acidic since we've measured at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This has a very significant impact on anything in the ocean that forms shells. And we really have no idea at the end of the day how this is going to play out. So we have to take a look at how well our current climate agenda is working to address these challenges. It's failing. This is a graphic of carbon emissions plotted against international agreements to reduce carbon emissions. And every year they go up and up and up, including in this year, they're going up. We heard an intervention earlier this afternoon with some of those numbers. None other than the BP Statistical Review of World Energy shows that in 2021, this is for 2020 numbers, investments in fossil fuel infrastructure were up, not down, and that, in fact, 83% of all global energy was still fossil-based. So if you want to bet the house on carbon reduction being the path to a safe and livable climate, I think it's a scary bet, and we need to hedge that bet. Renewables were only 5.7% of the total. So what do we need to do? First, I'm going to skip this slide. We need a new climate agenda. We need an agenda that adds removal of carbon from the air and the water and repair of some of those critical functioning parts of our global ecosystem that we can't live without. And that's the big idea that I'm going to talk about. We need a massive shift in our conservation and ocean and climate agenda. So, first, on carbon removal, the ocean can actually play an enormous positive role in removing carbon. It already does. About 50 times more carbon sits at the bottom of the sea than in the atmosphere right now. So if we can use biomimicry and geomimicry to essentially accelerate, enhance, or mimic existing both biological and geological pumps, we can potentially take enough carbon out of the atmosphere to start to cool the planet and rebalance the global carbon system. David showed a slide about Running Tide, one of the companies we work with, seeking to do exactly that, to grow kelp on free-floating mini buoys that when the kelp gets heavy enough, releases the buoyancy in the buoys and they sink to the bottom of the sea. There's 100 other ideas people are working on right now, from electrochemistry. This is a picture of our website where we've got roadmaps on these technology pathways. Electrochemistry, which is separating carbon out of seawater using electricity. macroalgae cultivation, which is the running tide example, and many others, and ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is adding alkaline material or liquid to the oceans, which creates a chemical reaction that moves carbon from the upper layer of the ocean to the lower layer. There's two more big areas, one called microalgae, using phytoplankton, and the other blue carbon ecosystems. Over the next 50 or 60 years, these are going to be the biggest growth areas in the conservation agenda and hopefully in the economic agenda, because we're going to have to remove carbon to keep the planet safe. But it won't be enough, because it can't happen fast enough to cool the planet. We are facing a dangerous fever on the planet that is affecting really key parts of the system that we depend on for life. So we're also going to have to start thinking about whether we can repair, at least in the short term and in the medium term, forestall tipping points that we can't afford to exceed. So let me just talk about a couple of these. Arctic ice is one of the most important. The Arctic ice historically has reflected has reflected about 30% of the warming that we're now getting on the planet. So 30% of all the warming to date, this 1.2 degrees, has come from the loss of Arctic ice. That's going to continue, and this ice is essentially the planet's air conditioner. We can't afford to let it go. Secondly, we have these frozen methane hydrates in polar seas that as these seas start to warm, we risk the release of these methane hydrates, which are a much more potent greenhouse gas. Third, we've got forest fires above the Arctic Circle now, the boreal forest. It's just another example of a tipping point. And then lastly, the Greenland ice sheet. These are not the only tipping points on the planet, but they're some of the ones that we should really worry about and start thinking, is there anything that we can do to slow these down? And the answer is people are thinking about this. A project called Arctic Ice Project, which is thinking about using both wave-powered pumps and marine cloud brightening to increase ice in the summer so that we have more ice, increase ice in the winter so that we have more to melt in the summer. This is marine cloud brightening being used right now around the Great Barrier Reef to see if we can forestall bleaching events. This is a picture of what it might take to restore the Antarctic ice sheet, the Thwaites ice sheet, which would cause enormous sea level rise around the planet. And really the big question here is, can we afford not to think about these questions? Can we afford not to work on these questions? This is the next generation of exploration. Exploring how we actually live on this planet, as somebody said earlier, as passengers on a spaceship hurtling through space that is starting to lose its heat shields and is getting dangerously hot. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. We'll have the panelists up front now and the opportunity for some questions. Who would like to start? Someone in the back? Yep.
Hi. A couple of things. Reply, thank you so much for doing your work. I think it's really great.
Thank you.
But I think it's a great attraction for people to go dive. Personally, I think it's a great attraction for people to go dive, but I think that the claim to restore the reef is a little, I don't think we can really do that at this stage, unfortunately, because of water conditions. I mean, if the corals in other places die, when we plant corals, I mean, why would they survive if the water quality is bad? So, yeah, please. I mean, I think it's great for education and raising awareness and all that. I think it's perfect for that.
In South Florida, for some reason, we have these very resilient supercorals that we see all around Biscayne Bay. And like you saw, that Jose Cuervo Reef, it's just offshore. So they tend to just come to anything that is there. There's just no infrastructure for these corals to be there. And I'm not a coral scientist, but there's a lot of studies that are going on of why these corals are so resilient, and can these corals be off-planted in other places in the Caribbean, and maybe they're more heat resilient, maybe they're more resilient to other things. So that's kind of the situation off Miami Beach.
Maybe I'll ask each panelist if you could say a few words about how some of us listening to this presentation can help. Maybe give us some pointers on how people who care about these things in this room or in the Explorers Club, how can they help with your projects?
I think one of the most important things are collaborations and networks. So, if you have a network, share it. Be a mentor to someone, especially someone from a disadvantaged background. So I think that's one of the steps. That's one of the very easy lifts to things that we can all do, especially here with so many other amazing explorers.
I guess for me, you can maybe tell from what I said, I think the most important thing is to actually take stock of how bad things are. Not pretend that net zero by 2050 is a safe target or that the 1.5 degree target for climate change is a safe target. They're not safe. We need to do much better than that. We need to repair and restore our climate. And so getting that message permeated into places like the UN on Wednesday at World Ocean Day, the UN conference in Portugal, and every event where people talk about these targets is really important because we're working towards a target that is worse off tomorrow than we are today. Who does that?
I agree with both of you. 100%. Well said. Personally, I just want to say I come from a very different background. I come from fashion and art direction, and I went on a trip to Antarctica in 2015, and that really opened my eyes to all of these problems. And I just started to study. I started to read the IPCC reports. I started to, investigate all these things, and I felt that I had something to offer from the side of creativity. So, I realized these stories weren't being told in their true potential, and art has the power to make people fall in love with something, and when you love something, you want to protect it. So I thought that I could give that point of view to these issues. And I think everybody has the potential to bring a new point of view. Everybody can do something. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be an engineer. You just have to have the passion to want to save what this beautiful planet is, right? So.
Other question?
If you have a question, just raise your hand, and I'll be back in a second.
Thank you. Brad, this time it's for you. Hi, it's good to see you again. I think that what you were talking about is extremely crucial to our survival. Although I don't agree that plastic is that solvable because we don't have solutions yet. Basically, my question is what you're suggesting we should concentrate on is R&D to find solutions for those issues, right? Because we still don't really have those solutions, right? Did I understand correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're spending almost nothing on those second two R's. Yeah. We're just starting to now spend some money on carbon removal. And just by the way, that's not the same thing as carbon capture, which is from existing power plants or sources. Carbon removal is cleaning up the legacy pollution of 200 years of fossil fuels. We're just starting to invest in that. There's almost nothing being invested in the third tier. And I've been reading recently some pretty convincing arguments that say we should really flip our entire climate agenda on its head, and that cooling the planet should be our #1 priority right now. I'm not saying I fully agree with that, but I understand the argument. The heat already is dangerous. And we're not seeing it because of where we live, but people in India are seeing it right now. The Arctic is absolutely seeing it. And these average temperatures are not average across the globe. They're much higher in the Arctic. So we're already seeing 4 degrees of change in the Arctic. So we need massive new investment in these other 2 areas. But first, it has to be a thing, right? It has to be salient, because if it's not salient, nobody will invest in it. So that's really the big uphill battle right now.
Yeah, this is a question for Brad from Billstone. I spent a year on the ice. We put the first AUV into the Ross Ice Shelf, and my colleagues are out currently working on thwaites. Everything that's been done there so far is a pinprick, and we can take measurements but there hasn't been a plan for action. If you had the ability to move things forward, what would be the one thing that you would do that would try to reverse that trend? They are melting. They are about to go. How do you stop it?
So first, I just want to...
And how do you pay for it?
I want to commend one book to everybody called Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which I think is one of the great books for the coming century. And it actually talks about a whole plan on Thwaites to bring water up from underneath the meltwater and put it on top. I don't have the answers. That's not my role here. There is enormous human ingenuity across the planet. If we start to ask these questions and actually support people to answer them, I think other people much smarter than me will be able to come up with answers. I spent 5 years responsible for WWF's programs in the Arctic, and there are more Arctic scientists than maybe any other biosphere on the planet from every country. India has Arctic scientists because the Arctic affects the monsoons. There's almost no Arctic scientists that I know of asking, how can we stop what's going on? They're all documenting what's going on. And the reason is because it's not okay yet to ask, can we stop it? And to start spending careers on it. And for postdocs to get encouraged, and PhD students to encourage to work on this, and engineers. So that's why I said in answer to the question, we have to make this a thing. Repairing this planet, climate intervention, which I never thought I would say, when I started my career, is going to be what this century is going to be about if we survive on the planet.
Other questions? Oh, one more. Okay, we'll have this be the last one. We have another item on the agenda here.
Okay, these are big problems. The heating of the oceans, the heating of the climate, et cetera, et cetera. And it sounds really good to get rid of fossil fuel. But many places depend on fossil fuel, such as India, Malaysia, these kind of places. I know somebody who actually works for a coal company in India, and they need coal and they need fossil fuels. And if we knock down the fossil fuels too quickly before we get other things to replace it, people are going to starve, people are going to die. So we can't just knock out the fossil fuels. We really need to replace it with something scientifically so it's efficient enough so people are not going to die. It's not so easy.
Couldn't agree more. That's why I say we need to turn some of our attention away from the reduction piece and put it onto the removal piece, because as you're absolutely right, 20+% of people in India don't have electricity. We're not going to stop countries from making fossil fuel choices until there's a much better, cheaper choice, which doesn't exist yet. Otherwise, renewables would be higher than 5.4%. So we need to turn to some other solutions because we don't have time to wait for that reduction path, which is going to take a century.
Look, I guess we have one more question.
Sorry, I'll make it a quick one. It's a bit of a two-part.
Just a yes/no question.
Okay. Well, it can be a single sentence answer if easier. But the question was more just as we're on the topic of thinking about how to address climate change. Just also curious. This is a longer question, but perhaps it can be continued following. But just thinking about the role too of ancient wisdom and indigenous knowledge and nature-based solutions, and seeing how we live in harmony with our environments and with existing ecosystems, and how to revitalize those ecosystems that do exist, like mangroves and coral reefs and seagrass meadows and others that are doing this work already, and kind of powering and really spotlighting that, rather than some of the geoengineering. I get a little worried, although I'm excited to hear as the research continues. But that's just one thing I wanted to note. And then perhaps with that too, Sheena, I know your work is so exciting, and how you're also, I really love the framing too that Nekton takes with co-creating these explorations also with the governments, to think about what is this research then doing to the governance structures that exist? How is this then feeding into the way things will be regulated for protection as well of those ecosystems? So I don't know if there's a response there, if that's just sort of a seed for further discussion, but yeah.
Sheena, yes.
Yeah, so thank you for the questions. I think you're right. We have a crisis. I mean, I'm from a small island state, so I know. But one of the things is that people, even at home, don't respond to doom and gloom. So we have to excite them. And we found that, with the deep sea work, it's been amazing how many people have they meet me somewhere and they're like, how's the research going? They're actually actively taking an interest and caring about our ocean. So first and foremost, we have to kind of instigate that care, make people relearn why our ocean is so important for our very own survival.
Thank you, panel. We'll see you in a few. And now, we have another big idea to talk about, and it's my pleasure to introduce my beloved dive buddy and legendary ocean advocate, Sylvia Earl. Sylvia is going to share with us another big idea, which you've already heard something about. Sylvia? Come on out here.
Now I can see you. So, the big idea, it's actually a concept that is growing in favor with many names. Protect the ocean, nature-based solutions. National parks on the land have a counterpart now in the ocean, and the idea is really taking off. I have had good fortune to be able to help a bit when awarded the TED Prize in 2009 to make a wish big enough to change the world, and the wish was to really promote this idea, of course, grounded in exploration, in research, in new technologies, new submersibles, so we can access the biggest ecosystem on Earth, the deep sea. But the bottom line was to really inspire the protection of the ocean with a network of areas. Call them hope spots, if you will. And that's what we do call them at Mission Blue. But in partnership with many other organizations, all moving in the direction of, yes, restoring what we can, but first identify those areas that are currently in good shape. That's highest priority on the land and in the sea. That's in keeping with the 30% by 2030 that the United Nations, more than 70 nations now have endorsed. And that's great. But there are other places that, with care, can be restored. And the big idea that we want to share with you now is, how about this? Here in New York City, there is the Explorers Club, with people who travel all over the world, climbing mountains, going to the deep sea, going into the deepest forests, exploring. How about exploring your own backyard? How about a place not far from where we're sitting right now to call this place Shinnecock Bay, with support from the Shinnecock Nation, with support from Stony Brook Institution, with support from explorers, with the Explorers Club endorsement, to call it a hope spot. Ellen Prickett is a champion who recognized that the hope spots are getting some traction. There are 141 of them now around the country, around the ocean. These are places that individuals, that institutions nominate through Mission Blue, fill out a form, say why this place matters, what actions will help, and to commit to going from wherever it is, even really healthy places, but especially those that need some assistance to get from where they are to a better place. And with support from Esri, the GIS company. We have story maps for each of these areas. We're creating literally a network of hope, really grounded by people such as you, such as Ellen, who is right here, and with support from the co-nominator for having this area in our backyard here in New York as a hope spot with the Explorers Club support. And I'm not going to say much more because I would like to introduce Ellen, who is a kindred spirit. One of the things I love about Ellen is her passion for those fine old creatures that are still lurking out in the ocean that are in serious trouble, but by protecting the place right here offshore from New York might have a chance to recover. Call them sturgeon, if you will. You've been at this for quite a while now at Stony Brook, and with your associates, your colleagues, with your friends and allies here at the Explorers Club at Stony Brook, and I think around the world, you're onto something. Let's go explore.
Thank you for that introduction, Sylvia. We are kindred spirits. You know, Sylvia's been called many things, mostly positive. She's been called her deepness, and for a while people were calling her the Sturgeon General. And I said, you know, I've been studying sturgeon and saving sturgeon all around the globe for a long time. You think we could, like, maybe share this title? And you said yes. But I'm going to talk about, there's so many things that I would love to talk about, but I'm going to talk about tonight's big idea in New York, which is the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. So Shinnecock Bay isn't very far from here. It's about 80 miles away. It consists of 9,000 acres of open water, salt marsh, intertidal flats, and it's a really important habitat for wildlife, and it is a stronghold for threatened and endangered species. Because of the nature of the bay, that it's a shallow water bay, there's not a lot of turnover of the water in the bay, it's particularly vulnerable to declines in water quality. At one point, not too long ago, once upon a time, maybe like sometime in the last century, Shinnecock Bay produced a very large amount of all the hard clams that were consumed in the United States. It was said that 2 out of every 3 clams consumed in the U.S. came from the south shore of Long Island, and Shinnecock Bay was a big part of that. Well, when I started working at Stony Brook and took a look at Shinnecock Bay, there were basically no clams left. There was not enough in the water to sustain a viable fishery. And why was that? Because too many clams were taken. Over-harvesting, too much of their habitat was destroyed, there was dredging, there were destructive fishing gears that were used, and the water quality was really going south. So, you know, this has been my way of looking at the world since I can remember thinking about the world. When I see a problem, I don't want to just document the problem. I want to try to fix it. I want to try to leave the world in better shape than how I found it. And when I found Shinnecock Bay in this condition, I said, you know, this is a bay that maybe we can get some people to rally around and save. So what happened when the clams pretty much disappeared? Well, clams provide a very important ecosystem service. They filter the water. They take up pollutants. And by doing that, they really provide an important service. Without clams, then you lose that natural filtration capacity of the bay. What happens when you lose the natural capacity of the bay? Well, you see this picture. This is brown tide, and it really does look like this. It's brown. And this is what it looked like every single summer that I was in Shinnecock Bay for years and years. And it not only looks awful, but it affects the growth and the reproduction of the wildlife there. And it also, think about it, if you were a plant like a seagrass, it reduced the penetration of sunlight, and a lot of the seagrasses died because they didn't get enough light. Looking at the seagrass in New York State, in 1930 there were 200,000 acres of seagrasses in New York State. There was a 90% loss by the year 2009. And the New York State Seagrass Task Force estimated that seagrass would be extinct in New York by the year 2030. I mean, that's a pretty bad story, isn't it? And then even worse, this really scared a lot of people. We started to see what are called red tides. And red tides can cause paralytic shellfish poisoning in people. It can cause nerve damage, and it can cause fatalities. That was really scary. We went from brown water to things that could actually kill us. And this is the western part of Shinnecock Bay. In the early years of the restoration and before that, we were seeing about half the bay had to be closed to any kind of clamming to prevent clams from coming out that had these algae that could cause paralytic shellfish poisoning. So what we're seeing here is a death spiral. How did we turn it around? Well, the crux of it was to create what we called hard clam sanctuaries. These were places where we could plant hard clams, and we can plant them close together to one another because they have external fertilization, and if they're not near enough to one another, then there's not going to be successful reproduction. We put them in the western part of the bay, which was more degraded than the eastern part of the bay, and we planted millions of clams with the support of lots of people. The idea was that these clams would start to filter the water, a nature-based solution, and it would improve the water quality, but also that these clams would reproduce and grow and spread clams to the parts of the bay where fishing was still open. It took us a while to get permission, to get the right permits, but we finally succeeded in getting oyster reefs built as well. And now there are 7 oyster reefs also doing their job of filtering the water in Shinnecock Bay. And reseeding eelgrass. We discovered that taking the seeds from the shoots in the spring and the summer and spreading them around was a good way of reseeding the eelgrass. And now what's happened? After 10 years of dedicated restoration efforts, we've seen big changes. We started to see the loss of the red tides, thank goodness. So up to 2015, half the bay had to be closed to fishing for fear of paralytic shellfish poisoning. By 2017 and 2018, half that amount had to be closed. And since 2019, there have been no instances of red tide in Shinnecock Bay. Now, that was an amazing change. The water quality started to improve, and along with it, so did the seagrass. We've now got about 100 new acres of seagrass living in Shinnecock Bay. And as many of you know, seagrass are very mighty carbon sequesterers. They're our allies in fighting climate change, and they also are very important nursery grounds and feeding grounds for many species of fish in the bay. And what happened to the hard clams? What we hoped for actually happened. the clams reproduced, and it wasn't by accident, it was through science. We tried to be really smart about where to put these hard clam sanctuaries so that the currents would carry some of the larvae to places where they could re-establish fisheries. The amount of hard clams in Shinnecock Bay has gone up by 1,000% in 10 years. And in the last 2 years, there's been gangbusters clam fisheries outside of the hard clam sanctuaries. Numbers of clams that were able to be taken sustainably in quantities not seen since the 1980s. And even the fish populations are starting to recover. So these are some of my favorite fish. I've got a lot of different fish that are some of my favorite fish. These are Menhaden, and they're a kind of fish we call a forage fish. There's a book written about them called The Most Important Fish in the Sea, and everything depends upon them because they are the conduit between sunlight and they are the food that supplies the upper trophic levels in the ecosystem. These fish have increased in abundance by 3.5-fold in the last few years. So now when you look at Shinnecock Bay, it's a much, much healthier place than it was before. And it makes me happy every time I look at it because I feel like we have succeeded. We've succeeded in restoring a place that was in a death spiral, and now a lot of the harm that was done has been undone. One of the other things that makes me really happy is that we have a very abundant and diverse aquatic life within the bay. Who would have thought that there are native seahorses living in Shinnecock Bay? Who knew that there are northern star corals living in Shinnecock Bay? And the flounders, and the sharks, and the sturgeon. And we are using a variety of techniques to study these fish, but one of them is eDNA. We can maybe talk about that later. It's a concept where we just take a water sample, and from that water sample we find the DNA remnants left by the species that were there. And we've now discovered basking shark DNA in Shinnecock Bay. I mean, it's just amazing the things that we're finding. And every year we find more. We found more than 144 species of fish in this bay. And bird life, species that are endangered, such as the least tern eating a forage fish on the end, bald eagles that have recovered, and ospreys that are recovering and thriving, and marine mammals, such as harbor seals, as well as bottlenose dolphins. And if you take a trip just outside of Shinnecock Bay at the right time of year, the large schools of Menhaden bring in the whales. And we now have, outside of Shinnecock Bay, we have whale watching tours. And right in New York Harbor, we have whale watching tours because the Menhaden are back. The food for the whales are here, and so the whales are here. So with all the doom and gloom that we've heard about, a lot of it tonight, it's great to have a positive success story, a story not just of hope, but of hope that actually resulted in positive change, that demonstrated that we can change, we can repair the world if we give it our best shot, if we use good science, and if we keep going. So what's next? Are we done? Do you think I would say that? Well, obviously not. So one of the first things that we want to do next is to have what we're calling the inaugural Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot Synoptic Expedition. And we want to look at a much wider array of species than we've looked at before. You know, for example, we haven't taken account of the birds or the mammals or the things that live on the land that surround the bay. We want a broader, inclusive program with new partners. And we want to cover all the waters of Shinnecock Bay, including the waters that surround the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We've got a lot of goals for the future. We want to secure the future of Shinnecock Bay. Just because it's healthier now doesn't mean it'll stay that way. We have continued threats. Climate change is coming. Ocean acidification is a new threat. Sea levels rising. We may need additional restoration just to keep things in the same place where they are. The other thing is that now that we have so many years of very detailed data at all levels within the bay, Shinnecock Bay can serve as a test bed for testing new scientific methods and developing new science. We want to enhance engagement with stakeholders and, again, have broad, inclusive participation and partners and spread the word locally and globally. This is something that can be replicated elsewhere, and there are lots of places in the world where these problems that occur in Shinnecock Bay occur in other places. So thank you. There are a lot of people to thank, a lot of organizations to thank. I especially want to start by thanking the Explorers Club. The Explorers Club served as second nominator on the proposal to Mission Blue to designate Shinnecock Bay as a hope spot. And without their backing, I don't think it would have happened. The Institute for Ocean Conservation Science, which I head at Stony Brook University, has been instrumental in also developing the nomination proposal and in the restoration of Shinnecock Bay. I'd like to especially recognize Christine Santora, who I know is in the audience somewhere. Christine, maybe you could stand. Oh, she's sitting in my seat. Christine is the assistant director of the Institute, and she's also been the program manager for the Shinnecock Bay Restoration Program. So thank you, Christine. My colleagues in the School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences at Stony Brook University, we're a team. And the members of the team, we all have different expertise, but we have a common vision, and we've worked together to make this happen. Things like this don't happen just by one individual or one organization doing it. So a big round of applause for SOMAS and Stony Brook University. And I know this can be sometimes a little bit of a touchy subject, but you know, money helps. This work couldn't have been done without support, without funding, and a number of different individuals and organizations contributed support to this project through the 10 years, and in fact even before the 10 years during the planning phases. One foundation really stands out as being our major supporter, and that's the Lori Landau Foundation. And Lori Landau and Bob Mays, can you please stand up? I want to recognize you. Again, we wouldn't be here today without their support. And Mission Blue and Sylvia Earl. Sylvia, you've always been someone I've admired. You've always been someone I've wanted to emulate in various ways. And it's such an honor to have Shinnecock Bay be named a hope spot by you and by Mission Blue. Thank you. Thank you for reviewing the file. Thank you for making that wonderful decision. And thank you for schlepping all the way out here to New York to help make that decision.
Well, thank you for making it happen, but there's another big thank you, and that is to our friends at Rolex, because they have been backing the concept of hope spots from the very beginning. And the fact that we now have 142, largely is because we've had their generous backing. Expeditions. I love the idea of an explorers club, Stony Brook, Mission Blue, whatever you want to call it. Y'all come. Yeah. Are you in? Who's in? Dive, dive, dive. You're not likely to get the bends in Shinnecock Bay.
Not likely. Thanks for that. Well, there's one more important person representing a very important part of Shinnecock Bay. And actually, the bay is named after the Shinnecock Indian Nation. I'd like to introduce Kelsey Leonard. Kelsey was one of the people who wrote a letter of support for the Mission Blue Hope Spot of Shinnecock Bay. And she is an assistant professor. She has a PhD and a JD at Waterloo University in Canada. Kelsey?
Akwe, hello. It's really wonderful to be with you all this evening. As I was listening to the conversation, and you probably got this sense as well, we don't have a climate crisis or a climate problem. We have a human problem. And that is really at the heart of this work. And so when we're thinking about hope spots, when we're thinking about the Shinnecock Bay and what it means to us as Shinnecock people, but also to the broader world to inspire hope, it's to hopefully inspire us to change. Because the problem is within each of us and within each of the societies that we are citizens of, for the people that we vote for, and our inability to act. When we think about our world today, we have created a society in which we legalize the destruction of nature. We've lost over 68% of our wildlife populations in the last 50 years. We've seen about 2/3 of the world's longest rivers that no longer flow freely. And we've lost about half of our coral reefs in the past 30 years, much of which you heard about today. And that doesn't even touch upon our climate crisis. So when we think about the type of transformational shift we need in the world today, yes, we need hope, but we also need hope to inspire action. So being a legal scholar, being someone who is very much embedded within these conversations that we continue to have, lots of talk, not a lot of action, I'm hopeful within the law there's actually a point in which we can nudge people a little bit. We don't make laws because people just innately want to follow the rules. We make the law because we hope that it inspires our moral compass. We hope that it inspires society to change, to live up to those moral goals and those ideals that we have for our future and for future generations. And so there's a new, maybe old, law that's emerging around our world, and it's called Earth Law. Earth Law, sometimes you might have heard it called ecocentric law or Earth jurisprudence law. It's an emerging body of law that we create in order to protect, restore, and stabilize the functional interdependency of Earth's life-supporting systems. You're going to hear a little bit more about Earth Law, particularly in the context of oceans, tomorrow with some of my colleagues. But when I think about hope and hope spots, it really is about how do we tap in to millennia's worth of knowledge and applied science that is in existence in this part of the world and other parts of the world that has gone overlooked and in large instances excluded because of prejudice and discrimination and racism. And so there is a path forward. There's a way in which we look to new laws, new mechanisms, old laws, to chart a path in which we say nature has inherent rights. We as human beings do not get to gluttonously consume until there's nothing left. If we want to have a future where there are future generations of our descendants to inhabit this planet. If we want that future, if we want that vision, then we have to begin to recognize, and in some instances, re-recognize, that the natural world has inherent rights worthy of protection, that we are not entitled to nature, but we have been gifted a privilege to be birthed into existence on this planet, and with that comes responsibility. It comes duty and obligation to be stewards, to be conservators, to have the opportunity to fulfill a fiduciary responsibility and be reciprocal in the return of that gift of life. And so, for us as Shinnecock people, Shinnecock Bay is named for our nation. We have stewarded these waters for millennia. You saw a lot about PCPs, paralytic shellfish paralysis, and you saw a lot of the destruction of the bay. What you saw, though, if you could kind of deduce, was the western portion of the bay. The portion that our nation has been historically excluded from governing due to colonization and genocide. The eastern portion of the bay, it's healthy. Our people were criminalized as we said, no take. And now we have nature-based solutions where no take is showing fruitfulness, right? But in our ways of being and knowing, you don't take more than you need. You don't take more than what those mollusk relatives, those hard clams, those oysters need to thrive and flourish. But settlers and colonizers, they didn't get that. And when we said to them, no, you can't take from this side of the bay, we were criminalized for it. And yet now we are starting to come into conversation with one another to be able to mobilize our science together and say, if we want a shared sustainable path forward, we have to learn from one another. We can use Western science and indigenous science together to say this is how we protect. This is how we restore. This is how we repair. Shinnecock means people of the stony shore. And it speaks to the wealth of indigenous knowledge that we have for this unique waterscape, and that really is filled with burgeoning scientists and who we like to call shore protectors. We're born into this. We all have some type of natal connection to water. It's whether or not you've been fortunate enough to steward that connection over the course of your life. So, as Shinnecock people, in relation to the bay, we have not only witnessed each other's trauma from colonization and pollution and climate change, but we've also shared in moments of hope. From marriages and births and weddings, we have come to know each other intimately. And as a Shinnecock scientist, I am also aware of the unique living spirit of the bay. So, this evening the water has brought us together in celebration and in designation of the Shinnecock Bay as a Nusuk Jokag, a hope spot. So, it is now my great honor to be able to introduce one of our trustees, a leader for the Shinnecock Nation, Trustee Kelly Dennis, to be able to share with you more of our leadership and our ways of knowing as Shinnecock people. So Tabutni, thank you so much for having me, and Trustee Dennis.
I've been taking notes, so I'm going to set this microphone up if I can. I'm learning so much tonight. Tabutni, Dr. Kelsey Leonard, Shinnecock Tribal Member Citizen, and to all of you tonight. Akoy Natampok. Hello, friends. Kelly Natasuis, Kwag Pakine, Hadal Namo, Janosayang Tanasuis. Dennis Nishishayawank, Shinnecock Kwa, Hasaramisko Nipmunk, Nishipayawank, Shinnecock Reservation Atap.
that translates to, my name is Kelly, and my Algonquin name is Takine Haranamo Jumose Yangnataswas, and Dennis is my last name. And I am from the Shinnecock and Hassanamesko Nipmunk tribes, and I live on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation, which is right along the Shinnecock Bay. We live on a peninsula, the residential territory, where about, I would say, 1,000 plus of our tribe members live. And we have many services there. We have ceremonies there. In recent years, we've been reviving our whale ceremonies where, under the treaties that we had during the colonization, and, we've been able to hold on to those and try to basically be able to recognize what's been going on lately. Right before the pandemic happened, all of these whales were washing up on shores near us along the, there'd be near the Cooper's Beach, if you know that, and the Hamptons. It's interesting that you have an Indian reservation in, one of the wealthiest areas in the world. And, we're around the 1% where, the billionaires have moved out the millionaires years ago. But we're still holding on to our tribal territory and our ancestral territory. We recently were able to, are in the process of reacquiring Sugarloaf, one of our sacred ancestral burial grounds. So, as Kelsey introduced me earlier, I'm a tribal leader of the Shinnecock Nation, elected this past April, so it's about over a year. I've been serving, and I'm very honored to serve my nation. I serve as on the Council of Trustees as Councilwoman Secretary. And we are so happy that the Shinnecock our Shinnecock Bay has been able to have this designation as a hope spot and to learn so much about what this means for us. In order to honor our ancestors as the original indigenous stewards of the Shinnecock Bay, which is sacred, a very sacred water body to the Shinnecock people, with natural and cultural resources, we must ensure that those will sustain us today and for the next 7 generations at least. And then they can continue on from there. We just try to, 7 generations, okay, next 7 generations, you got this. So that's how we really have tried to sustain ourselves. And I'm proud that some of our Shinnecock tribe members take it upon themselves. We do have an environmental department coordinator and others who work within that, but we also have the Shinnecock kelp farmers. And I did hear that kelp was brought up a few times tonight. And they've really been at it trying to, combat those efforts of climate change, nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon dioxide, all those things that, contribute to the brown tide and red tide. And we're trying to, keep out of the eastern part near where the Shinnecock Reservation territory is, because we know how harmful it's been for the western side of Shinnecock Bay, and we've been so fearful that could contribute to harming both the marine life as well as human life if you consume those. But there's still a huge issue. Tila Troge on Science Friday on NPR with the Shinnecock kelp farmers commented about there being a 90% loss of some of the marine life related to the clams, and now you can't even get bay scallops. And I love bay scallops. That is my diet. So I'm really hoping that a continuation of what we do can continue to bring that back. And we really just want to tell everyone today how proud we are of this moment, and that, we want to support this designation of the Hope Spot for collaborative research, protection, and preservation efforts, and we are very eager to explore a memorandum of understanding or other agreement which would move towards good faith development of a partnership that would definitely recognize our tribal sovereignty, as we are the 565th federally recognized tribe in the United States, and we have a government-to-government relationship with the federal government, and we share that with and our relationships with the local and state governments as well. And we hope to use what we have going on now, and where we're strengthening our government, our administrative capacity, so that this work may continue forward. So Tabutne, and I also really would love to share a song with you tonight, if that's okay. So Tabutne meaning thank you, and I'm going to end with a Tabutne thank you song. But my mother taught us just recently a water song, so I'm going to sing that one first. And this water song translates to that water is lifeblood for our Mother Earth. Nibi wabo and Diane Akimi squeeze Nibi wabo heya 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 home Nibi wabo and Diane Akini squeeny be wambo heya 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 yo. One more Tabutne, thank you. Thank you. So that was Tabutne Gechemaredo. Thank you to the creator. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing evening! What a great kickoff to this week's affairs. I have a few things I'd like to do to close out the evening. One is to first re-express just how important it is to the Explorers Club to be supporting these really big ideas that you've heard a little bit about tonight, and especially the Shinnecock Bay Hope Spot. You know, I don't know about all of you, but in fact, I know about all of you. We've all continued to express both the profound problems we're facing and what an amazing pleasure and important opportunity is to see that there are opportunities like these Hope Spots, these 142 places around the globe that really show that we really do have the power to make a difference and make this better. And the Explorers Club Board of Directors actually some months ago passed a board resolution to be the seconder to help make this come into existence, and we are pleased and proud to have been a part of it, and of course continue to express our support and will continue to support this effort. Constance pinged me a little before this to make sure that I reminded people that if they want to get a chance to actually see Shinnecock Bay for yourself, you can join us this Saturday, June 11th. You'll be able to join Ellen and the Stony Brook scientists on a boat trip to see their incredible work firsthand, and I'm told you can sign up for that on the Explorers Club website. I want to thank everybody for coming here and being a part of this today, starting especially with our presenting sponsors, Rolex. Thank you all so very much. Every time the Explorers get together, I'm always amazed. Of course, you've been a big supporter of the club, but it also all of the other communities that we connect to. You're such a big part of the DNA of all of this. We're really proud to be working with you all very much. Thank you. But of course, I can't go by without, you know, as the president, you actually don't get roped in personally to too many things other than getting to stand at a podium and read a few notes. But I do get to see firsthand just how hard people work to put these things together. You know, starting with, again, Ted Janulis and the staff of the club and the incredible group of volunteers that Ted assembled to put this whole event together. My thanks to all of you for supporting this. As well as, of course, all of our other volunteers and sponsors. But, of course, all of you are guests who are here not only tonight, but I'm sure I know I've already talked to a lot of you. I know a lot of you are going to be with us all the rest of this week. I think it's going to be a phenomenal week. I look forward to participating along with the rest of you. And so with that, I will close out this evening and invite you at least to head home. I'm not sure there's any drinks or snacks left over there. It's getting a little late. But regardless, good night. Have a good evening. See you the next few days.
Sorry.